So my son just graduated from college and he is contemplating becoming a professional chess player. And I thought, okay, this is actually something he can do. He has a rating. He has been playing chess since he was about 3. It's just not exactly what I expected when he graduated early with a degree in political science and economics. Now, he's also considering law school. He did a year study abroad in the UK, and he's contemplating going back to Leicester. So all these decisions are facing him. And one of the things that I have noticed is the overwhelm of that is making it hard. So we were even talking about this, about, well, what's the chess move? Like when you think about the long-term play, how can we bring that into what you're doing? And it was a really hilarious conversation with my son as he's making these decisions. And I was thinking about that story when I was thinking about our guest, Jo Saxton, who was last week. We had this amazing conversation. If you haven't listened to last week, we talked about leadership and our cultural moment and the brilliance that Jo Saxton has and brings. So if you are new to the Joyosity podcast, every week we bring experts and leaders to help you really apply what we're talking about in your everyday walking around life. But we always base our things on 3 bedrock beliefs. One is that true leadership requires a connection to everything that makes us human. And 2, if we use genuine curiosity, we can create positive culture with all those complex people that you work with, including yourself. And then 3, we put joy at the center of what we are doing, because when joy is at the center, leaders and organizations are whole. So we have our leadership expert of Jo Saxton, who has been leading for decades. She is an author. She is a speaker. She is her own podcaster with a podcast called the Lead Stories Podcast. She runs a women's leadership program called the Ezra Collective. She is a phenomenal leader. And I've calmed down a little bit from last week's episode of my own fangirling for her. But I am so excited that she is back for a second part of our conversation. So thank you.
It's good to be back.
Yeah. So we were talking so much about getting stuck in reactivity last week and like the overwhelm that was happening. And one of the things that I think about joy, because I talk about joy at work and how do we restore joy to work, is that people often have a mistaken idea of joy, that joy is cotton candy and it's balloons and it's light and fluffy thing. And when really I think joy is like lavender, that lavender has deep roots, that real joy has deep roots, and deep roots form in the dark. And lavender grows in rocky soil, it grows on hilly soil. And when we think about creating leaders who are effective, but also don't sacrifice themselves, I think you have also talked about the importance of deep roots.
Yeah.
What do deep roots look like in a leader? And how do we translate that into daily habits or daily things that feel manageable when my phone is going ding, ding, ding all day long?
Yeah. No, I love that picture of lavender. It's a really powerful thing. My leadership foundation is that I really do believe we lead from the inside out.
Yes.
That when we show up at work, when we show up in our professions, we bring us with us. We don't just bring our abilities, but who we are. And we spend so much of our time in that space at work, whether we are going into an office or whether we are showing up online in some, in a remote setting. So when you gave that picture of being in joy being like lavender and having deep roots in the dark, I thought, well, it reminded me that for me, when I'm thinking of those roots, I'm thinking of things that are often away from work, that are shaping how I show up at work. Not exclusively, but including those things. And to draw again on that picture of our chess moves, one of the moves is a real attention to well-being.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not well, how does that impact everything else? How does that impact whether there can be joy? And so I'm looking at, when I say well-being, I'm thinking, how am I doing mentally? How am I is anxiety in the driver's seat of my life right now? And if so, is that circumstantial? Has that been a long time? Do I need to name some things that I've not been naming? Is depression shaping my story right now? And I think, again, for us as leaders, it's sometimes we're good at sometimes we don't want to even know about that stuff, but sometimes we're good at knowing about that stuff for other people, not so good in ourselves. Because we're leaders, as though somehow that's a vaccine from,
like, we don't have humanity.
Like you, so that, and it couldn't possibly, kind of thing. I'm immune to those things, which is awkward when you think of the pressures of your job. But so there's an investment in me mentally. Alongside that, emotionally, how my relationships, including my working relationships, do I have friends? Do I have vent spaces? Do I have people I laugh with, people I enjoy, and people who enjoy me? And how tenuous are those threads of relationships? There are key colleagues and friends I work with that I just like to hang out with, but then there are friends outside my work who, every few weeks we've got to go for a walk. It's not a fixed rhythm all the time, because both of us work and we're busy, but it is a time we don't let too long go by before that. And I would encourage us to think about those things. I would think about our physical well-being. And I think I'm a lot more attuned now, and this is, I'm sure, a function of age and perimenopause.
So real.
I remember there was a point when I went to the doctor and I said, I just don't feel like myself. I don't feel like myself, and I feel really fragile. And realizing that the demise of estrogen in my life, the lack and the decline of estrogen in my life, was fundamentally shaping how I showed up at work. It was, and I was thinking things about what I could do and become that I'd never thought before. And it was a physical thing that was affecting how I showed up as a leader. And so, and I've had to realize, and it can be, that's one particular, it could be an allergy to a food. It could be anything that is just shaping how we show up. And what a high price to pay for your talent and your skill set. If by not attending to that and not managing those things, as well as the dopamine, do you know what I mean? And all of those things that do you know what I mean? All the things that you just need to be generating in your body, or need to not be generating in unhealthy ways.
Right.
So I want to, but I've also thought of, and to go back to our conversation last week about what's in our minds, what's prodding our minds, whether it's the notifications and the alerts and stuff. And so how am I taking care of my intellectual well-being? What am I allowing to feed my mind? What am I, and I'm not saying that every TV show has to be really refined. I don't mean that. I'm just like, are we paying attention though to what's impacting it, and I think there's something about the creativity that, like, because when we are in a time of mass uncertainty or pressure, some of our best leadership things will come out of our creative solutions. How are we activating creativity? And I don't mean everybody go and paint a picture, although if that floats your boat, go ahead. But are there, creativity is about the thing. I remember hearing a definition once about it being what, creativity can be helpful and useful. Do you know what I mean? As well as things that kind of appeal and create delight in people. But I would encourage us, and whether that's like you're going to bake something, or whether you're in the yard, or whether it's a long walk in nature, but I would encourage us to have things which reconnect us with our humanity. Now, as a person of faith, that's another part that I'm asking myself.
Absolutely.
I'm asking myself about my spiritual well-being at this moment. What's my prayer life like, and all of those things. But I would encourage us to be thinking of I think that's a long-term chess move.
Yes.
And a long-term chess move that actually strengthens us for the task. So I want to be thinking about that. For me, I'm like, that's how I move. That's a fundamental chess move for me that I'm having to take a fresh look at.
Well, I love those areas, because I think when, back to the story that I told at the top, my son really is like, oh my gosh, I have so many. It's the paradox of choice in some ways. There are so many options, and because he has just spent 3.5 years studying political science and economics, this current time is incredibly challenging because he's like, wait, this is everything that I've learned and everything feels upside down. And so you mentioned this idea of like, where am I mentally? And we kind of came back to that. It was like, rate how you just feel every day.
Yeah.
You know, like it's really hard to make a decision when you're feeling it like a 2 every day.
Yeah.
You know, and
Absolutely.
so just little things like that, like, so mentally, where are you? How are your relationships? And do you have places where you can safely say, here is how I really feel?
Yeah.
Not that we're not vulnerable, but Annie F. Downs often says, nothing is secret, but some things are private. You know, like who's the person that gets that? You've got to have those people. And then you mentioned your physical space and what does it look like intellectually? What am I feeding my brain with? I have a really good friend who loves true crime podcasts. You know, that is like, and she is always the person when we're traveling together, like thinking someone's going to kill her. And I'm like, I mean, I think there might be a correlation here. I'm like, we're going to be fine.
That's hilarious.
Oh, it is so funny. I always want to go, did you want to be on the true crime podcast? Anyway, but like, you know, when we talk about creativity, last month I had Jeff Harry on and we talked about play and how play is craft as well. Like what feels like play to you. And that's where creativity comes out. God bless the people who are creative with Excel spreadsheets, because I'm not. And, you know, and taking care of your soul in a spiritual sense, based on who you are is also a part of who we are. We have wholeness beyond what is in this world at this moment. And we've got to think about that. And so I appreciate just those categories of when I'm thinking about building roots and checking in on those daily habits, that's just really helpful to put it into some sections and think about, well, how do I do this? And then when you do it like that, one starts to show itself as the weak one. And you're like, oh, let me start there. And that will help other things. Oh goodness. The other, and it's hard, I think, because of that distraction piece. Like it's hard to get distraction. So when there is all of this noise and you have these categories, what are some of the things that you help people do to refocus? What are some great questions to ask ourselves when we're feeling this distraction and overwhelmed to help kind of cut through noise?
Yeah, I think again, I come back to like finding your way of diagnosing what's going on, your diagnostic tool. So I found a SWOT analysis or variations of that a really helpful thing. I think sometimes the external tools that have neutral language are actually quite helpful. And I think questions are helpful, and having, whether it's a conversation partner or whether it's a journaling question of what would make life better right now, or when was the last time you felt joy, or what feels impossible. Sometimes you just need to get it out to look at it. Sometimes you just need to get that would be my primary thing. And I know different personalities do that in different ways, but how do you get a chance to, because this is about self-leadership, how do you get a chance to put it out there so you can look at it more fully? And take a step back. And I would say, can you give yourself an hour this week to do that?
And it feels like a luxury, but it isn't. It's actually a lifeline.
Absolutely. I think it's mission critical. I really do. I think it, because I think our lives drift. And it's very easy to get back into the tyranny of the urgent and all of that and not stop and think. I was away until the weekend. And I just got back and I looked around and I thought, these are the things I've left unattended to. And I've had to sit myself down and think, there's not going to be that special day when you have all the time in the world to get all the things done. So what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do about the fact that that's not your life and may not be for a little while? Because we have those chapters, don't we? You know, for all the accountants in tax season, they're like, April isn't a good month for me, actually. Do you know what I mean? And no, I can't cut. That's not the time I'm going to declutter my house. That's not the time I'm going to be, you know, and all the pastors at Christmas are like, let me be.
And all the musicians, we're all like,
and all the musicians and all the teachers at the start of the school year. So there are some times which aren't good times, But are there times when we can build small rhythms, small repeatable rhythms? So no, you don't have an hour, but do you have 10 minutes? And rather than think, because I don't have an hour, nothing, I can't do anything.
Right.
Can we take the 10 minutes on one of these things? I remember talking to a coach one time, and she said, sometimes you want to see these things like the habits you want to build, like a meal. We were talking about creativity, and I am saying, sometimes there's the luxury meal, and that's when you go somewhere, like you go and see a show and you spend all the time. She goes, sometimes it's lunch, sometimes it's a snack. The key thing is that you're recognizing maybe one time you're just listening to one song you love as you drive in the car.
Yeah.
It's not the show. But it's a small segment of something, which is a spark. Sometimes you've got maybe you can make time for a little bit more and you listen to an album.
Yeah.
And or you watch a show you love, or you pick up that book or something. It's not everything. But I think even identifying the little rhythms we can have in the day, week, month, and this is work. We know that it's effort to do this. It is effort. And it does require time. But I do believe the dividends are worth it and are worth kind of persevering for.
Yeah. One of the things when I'm working with clients, both my coaching clients and organizations, I often come back to, I have what's called the Joyosity Compass, Joyosity Explorer map. That's what it's called. I should know what I call these things. But basically in the Joyosity Explorer map, it's a set of 5 stops per se. And it's like, well, what brings me joy? What's connected to my purpose? Like, why does this bring me joy? From anything from, I really love to pet my dog. I had one client, she's like, do I write that down? I was like, this is a no judgment zone, write it down. Like that brings you joy. What also brought her joy was creating amazing experiences for clients. Well, that's important. Both of these things are important. And then a joy draining list. What are the people and the things that just suck every bit of your energy?
So key. I love that. I love the thing, the honest recognition. I think, again, going back to the naming that we referred to last time, that to be able to identify the things that drain you and just call it. Just call it. And I heard, I want to say I did this research, but actually this is Instagram. I heard this thing on Instagram the other day.
Wait, one of my friends says, I was doing some research reading an article, which means I watched a TikTok.
It's like, it was on the stories, but it was one line, and she said, and it was a debate, and one said, I think we need to come to terms with the fact that when we say it takes a village, that doesn't exist anymore. And then the person responded saying, no, it's that you probably have to buy the village now. And I thought it was a really powerful acknowledgement of actually, and they're like, whether it's meal planning or whether it's like help with family or all these things. But I loved the debate because it makes you think, okay, what can you still resource and source? What can't you? Because there may be some joy drains in there. That you need to not feel guilty about and just think, I can't anymore. I can't live this life and lead, or maybe you might be able to in 6 months, but the pressure at work is such, and the transitions that you're doing at work are such that you need to look at your life and say, okay, I've got this. Look, I didn't ask for this difficult 6 months, but I'm in it, and I can't see the end of the tunnel, or at least I can, but it's a while away. What do I need to do to ask for help in, buy in, pay for, that will take the pressure off somewhere? Rather than try and perform it all to the same ability forever, and then wonder why we are burnt to a crisp by life. We arrive at that 6 months like an ember.
Barely hanging on.
Barely a burnt ember.
Yeah. Well, and the things that drain us, I think for women, I think this is probably for everybody. I think it is particularly hard for women because if it is in the traditional category for women, we can have a deep sense of guilt. So I love my kids. I've got 4 of them. They are all amazing humans. I am so blessed. When they were toddlers, they're terrorists, and those are not the people I want to hang out with. I mean, I loved them, but oh my goodness, that is not my sweet spot. Even though I was an educator and taught kids, give me junior high, 13 any day over a 3-year-old. And some people think I'm crazy because that's not their sweet spot. And so I was much more drained as a parent in the early years, whereas some of my friends like that, they loved it. That was their favorite. And I was like,
so true.
Oh my gosh. So like recognize what drains you. Not what is draining out in the world, but what is draining for you specifically, I think is so important.
I think that's brilliant.
And how can you ask for help? How can you buy the village? How can you invest in the village in the ways that bring you joy? All of those things are so valuable that don't just come. Like we have to take the time to that hour you were talking about, or even if it is 15 minutes, taking that time to say, this is what's happening for me right now. How do I move on from that? That is really, really powerful. And it's connected to this idea of purpose. I talk a lot about joy, again, isn't cotton candy. It's very much connected to deep roots that are purposeful. Like, what is your purpose? How do you impact other people? And or on an earlier podcast, I had Jade Simmons on, and she has this famous line where she says that purpose isn't the thing you do, it's what happens in others when you do what you do.
That's powerful.
This life-giving purpose. And you talk some about Tove and like creating things that are life-giving and fulfilling their purpose. So how do you help people do that? Like you're in the middle of, I have these Slack messages and client calls and all of that. Like, how do we reconnect to purpose to get those types of results?
Yeah. I mean, and the fun thing about that and the quirky thing about that is even when you are dealing with a team, their purpose can vary. Like there can be a range. There could be someone who's showing up and saying, I love this work. I love this job. I love what it helps me do. Others who are like, I love my family and this is providing opportunities. It's no less purposeful. It's just that it's somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? It's the byproduct of the financial gain that helps them do things which, looks after a parent or an aging aunt or helps them with their care or
gives them the flexibility they need, whatever.
It's significant things. And so I think one of the things I love to do is help people identify, but also validate that it doesn't have to, like, we're all about this. I have found the worst working environments were when you had to feel exactly like your boss did.
Oh, say that again.
I couldn't breathe.
No.
I couldn't breathe. It's not that I showed up. It was almost like this limited view that to excel at work meant you had to almost be a carbon copy of their values.
Right. Nope.
And you had to that was an expression of loyalty, or that was an expression of competence and all that kind of stuff. It was like a very one-dimensional understanding of
I'm like literally my chest going in while you're talking because I have felt that.
You know what I mean? It's just so suffocating. It's so suffocating. Where actually, I do believe that I do believe that the different purpose things about us, the different things that cause us to show up in Slack, in these things can work together. They can align. They don't have to be an identikit, but they can align.
Absolutely.
And with my teams, I'm looking for alignment rather than copycat. So no, you don't have to feel as passionate about the exact thing, but what are you passionate about? And is it, hey, I've got 2 young kids and I'm paying their way through school. Fantastic. Well, let's get this work done as well as we can so that it can do that work that you want it to do.
Absolutely.
And rather than, I need you to care about it the way I care about it to show that you're really in this. Of course you're in this. You're doing the struggle with the juggle day in, day out because you're in this, So that's one part of it. And then another part is when I'm looking at leaders and I'm like, what are their unique things that they bring? Are there fresh perspectives that they bring? Even if their reason for being there is elsewhere. Are there talents and skill sets that they have? I'm always on the lookout for that with people, because we often talk about in leadership spaces not being the smartest person in the room and stuff. Well, this is how we identify it. by looking and
Mhm.
asking questions and being curious about the people who you're working with and seeing the things that matter to them and why,
Mhm.
and all of that.
And
So
that
those things have
totally
helped me.
reduces overwhelm too.
Yeah.
So one of
It's
the
so good.
unhelpful stories that I grew up with,
Hmm.
I in church was if you wanna lead, you have to put out the chairs. Now, I agree
Hmm.
that you have to be willing to do something that doesn't seem glamorous. Like,
Yes.
I get that. Why that turned into such an unhelpful story is because it was an earning posture that ended up not being helpful, which is another
Yeah.
story. But it was also like you have to be able to do all of the things. That is why, as in addition to all the other things we've talked about that come at you,
Yeah.
I it is ludicrous to think
Yeah.
that me, one limited human, no matter how smart and brave and kind I believe that I am, can do everything.
All the things. Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And Gay Hendricks talks about your zone of genius. And like, there's so
Yeah.
much research as I'm writing this book about when we are in flow and when we are doing what we can do, and we identify what other people do better than
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
the overwhelm reduces immediately because
Yeah.
we all feel and actually are more productive because I'm not having to do everything.
Everything. And
It's
particularly having to do everything to prove you should do what you're designed to do.
right,
You
right.
know, and it's
Yeah.
like taking some specific person's heart posture and
Mm,
or a tool that they use to correct their heart posture, and then just making it an everything everywhere for everyone,
right.
as though you couldn't still have all of those issues whilst putting out chairs,
You
which you
sure
can.
can.
Sure can.
Sure
Sure can.
can. Oh, and that goes back to that idea of deciding and having to reflect of like,
Hmm.
ooh, where am I? Because where am I? Am I using my creativity? What can I bring to this?
Yeah.
And especially if you're the person, you're kind of managing up and down, it can be scary to go to your leader and say, hey, I'm seeing this creative opportunity. Uh,
Yeah.
but man, I think as a leader, when I've had my team come to me and say, hey, we're doing it like this, I think it's way better if we do it like this. And I came up with this idea. I'm like, praise the Lord. Yes, let's do that. Because I like so thinking about it that way of like when you come up with your creative solutions or you go to somebody, that is how we reduce overwhelm in all kinds of places. When you bring
Mm.
yourself and are willing to be vulnerable, because if they say no, they say no, and that's okay. But recognizing that this is my gift to give, I think is almost as important as recognizing I can't do everything.
Mm. Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So as we are coming to a close, I would love two things. One,
Mhm.
tell the people where to find you and how to connect with you, because I mean, I could say for days how wise and impactful you have been
Oh,
in
thank you.
my life. And I think everybody needs Jo Saxton in their life. Uh, but also just one little challenge for people to, you know, use a chess move. Like what do we need to think about creating that
Yeah.
space of leadership this week?
Okay. I would, in terms of how to find me, josaxton.com is my website. And so that's a landing page
That's
for all
if
the
you're
things.
watching, it's
If you're
on the
watching there somewhere. Um, and that's a landing page for all my things. So you'll find out about the podcast lead stories available wherever you get your podcast. It'll show you books, events, things like that. So that's or on Instagram or LinkedIn as Jo Saxton. You'll find me there. And I have a newsletter that comes out every few weeks and things like that.
Cup of Joe, which I
Cup of
think is the
Joe.
best title.
I'm not sure who came. I think it was a friend of mine who said that. I can't remember how we came up with it. Anyway, it's fun. I think my leadership challenge, and actually, what my takeaway is from our conversation is, I think an hour, and you might want to break that hour over a few days this week to look at the joy drains
Mm,
and the joy fillers.
yeah.
That might be a great starting point, just to the gift of time to identify those things. Now you might be like, I don't need an hour, I've got 5 minutes. If you can't do an hour, like you can spread it across the week, you can
Totally.
spread it across a couple of days, but some time to identify those things and to begin to think through, once you've identified them, to think through what you could do about them, I think could be a really helpful piece.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. And I, even as I was talking about the Joyosity Explorer map, like it has 5 stops. I don't think I've ever directed people to say, you don't have to do this all in one sitting. I think sometimes we do want focus time, but if you're in one of those seasons where you're doing everything you can to keep your nose above water, grab the protein bar.
Yes. Yeah.
and eat something, take a little bit and start with that.
Yeah. Don't starve yourself until you can have a 3-course meal.
Right. It's so good. It's so good. Jo, thank you for just being who you are, for bringing yourself and your wisdom and sharing that with us. We are just so, so grateful. Thank
you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody. So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them what you're going to do. Check the show notes for all the links and connect with us on LinkedIn and all the other socials, or just, drop me an email at Jenn with 2 N's at jennwhitmer.com. We want to keep this conversation going with you. I know your earballs have a lot coming at them, so thank you for listening to the Joyosity podcast and being a part of our community. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It helps more people join us in the movement to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.